Welcome to your astrological forecast for the week of Monday, November 4th through Sunday, November 10th, 2024. This week is a little bit strange, especially when it comes to Mercury. Mercury is doing multiple weird things this week, and some of those things are actually a little bit subtle, so I don't know if everyone's aware. So we will talk about that. Before we talk about Mercury, though, let's check in with the other planets. I mentioned in the last week's forecast that by the end of last week, we have this whole fire theme going on. And we can really see that as we start out this week. So this is the chart for Monday, November 4th, 2024, 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can see we have Mars freshly in Leo at 0 degrees Leo. And contributing also to this fire theme, of course, Chiron is in Aries, just like it has been since 2018. That hasn't changed. What has changed is Mercury is also freshly in a fire sign at 2 degrees Sagittarius. We have Moon transiting roughly like through the middle of Sagittarius today, and Venus is at 21 degrees Sagittarius. So a lot of Sagittarius themes, especially, considering we're this early in the season, this early in fall, this early in November for that matter too. Sun is not even technically halfway through Scorpio yet. So usually we would have at least Mercury, maybe Venus, or maybe some other planets in Scorpio with the Sun. But the Sun is kind of uncharacteristically alone right now. So in other words, the Sun would suggest we're in Scorpio season. It's supposed to be kind of a creepy vibe. This is kind of the darker, more intense side of fall, like I've talked about in recent forecasts, and it's emotionally intense. That's what we would typically be experiencing, and we are still experiencing that on some level with the Sun there. But I would argue, especially at the beginning of this week, with Mercury, Venus, and the Moon all in Sagittarius, the focus is really more on Sagittarius. It's almost like the Moon, Venus, and Mercury are teaming up to kind of outshine the Sun, at least in sort of astrological terms, when it comes to the themes. Not literally; they're not literally going to outshine the Sun, but in a way, that's the focus. So Sagittarius is a much different vibe. It still is a fall sign, but Sagittarius is cheerful. It's probably the most optimistic sign, I would say. So that's more the energy of celebration and eat, drink, and be merry, and it's kind of about grandiosity. And Sagittarius is more like Christmas time usually, you know what I mean? So it's almost like we're kind of ahead of schedule in a way. We're skipping over this dark, like, oh, it's getting colder and more intense kind of vibe of Scorpio. We're skipping all that and saying, it's almost like Christmas time in a way. At least that's how I would relate to it in kind of like Western society, American terms, I guess you could say. But yeah, so that's generally the theme right now. This week, Moon will be transiting from Sagittarius through Pisces, so we'll go over some kind of a bumpy area for the Moon through Capricorn and Aquarius, but then it'll get much softer at the end of the week when Moon reaches Pisces. But let's talk about Mercury because I haven't addressed that yet. Before I do, I just wanted to mention I am doing readings. I've been doing lots of readings for you guys, and I love it. I get so many good reviews. So if you want to be the next person to get your reading, it's up to you whether you want me to post it publicly on my channel or I can keep it private for you. That's totally optional. But definitely let me know. I put my website and my email in the description of every video that I post. So definitely don't be afraid to reach out if that's what you're into. Okay, let's talk about Mercury. I keep pushing that back. So I'm not showing you the chart for that. So I'm so sorry. I'm uncharacteristically unprepared. Let's go to November 7th. So this is the day where Mercury reaches its pre-shadow. And what's interesting is at this part of the Mercury cycle, Mercury is actually traveling pretty fast. It's traveling a little bit faster than it normally does from our perception. It's traveling a little bit over 1 degree per day. So what's unusual about this is that typically, especially at this part of the Mercury cycle, Mercury would be aspecting many planets. That's what's normal for Mercury. Mercury makes more aspects than any other planet does. So that's typically kind of what feels, like the material for me to talk about in these forecasts, for example. But this week, Mercury is not making any aspects. The reason why is because almost all the planets are either halfway through their signs or they're at the end of their signs. The only planets at the beginning of any signs are Mars at 1 degree Leo, and then Mercury at, by November 7th, Thursday, Mercury's at 6 degrees Sagittarius. So Mercury's already trined Mars, That's already passed. So now at this point, Mercury has no other planets to aspect to. So very unusual. I was looking at my calendar before I started filming, and seeing little to no aspects. I double checked it to make sure everything was correct, but that's what's happening. So what does that mean? That just means maybe less communication. It's especially interesting too because Mercury is debilitated. It's in detriment in Sagittarius. And Mercury is beginning to prepare to go retrograde in Sagittarius. So, Sagittarius is already a pretty wild sign, but particularly for Mercury is sort of exiled there. So, in other words, we may be coming across strange and unusual information right now. We may be communicating in a in a different way, and communicating in a sort of out of the box way. This is a very unique and kind of quirky way of communicating, and the information that's being delivered is quirky, different, out of the box, unconventional. That's what happens when we have kind of detriment energies. But especially too, again, November 7th, Thursday, we have Mercury reaching its pre-shadow at 6 degrees. I think there's a lot of confusion about pre-shadow and post-shadow. So I will simplify it. Basically, we're preparing for Mercury to station retrograde. It won't do that until November 25th, which is a Monday. So we're not there yet. We're not close to there yet. What this is Mercury's traveling super fast, and it's reaching the point that it will eventually station direct at. So that might sound confusing. Basically, so Mercury will eventually reach 22 degrees Sagittarius, where it will station retrograde, and then it will go all the way backward in late November, early December, and it will eventually reach the point that it is at now, if that makes sense. So in other words, Mercury has just reached the point that it is about to, later in the year, it's going to backtrack and reach the same point again. So what does that actually mean for us? Basically, what happens, so when Mercury is reaching the pre-shadow, it's traveling very quickly. And basically what that means is that there's a lot of information coming at us right now. There's a lot of new events happening. I've also noticed Mercury has to do with not just information and communication, it also has to do with kind of the busyness of things, like the rhythm, the momentum of things. So with Mercury traveling so fast, we may be very busy right now. Lots of errands, lots of conversations, just lots of little things that we're doing, if that makes sense. So there's kind of so much going on right now in your life that it's very unlikely that you are actually absorbing everything. We're not understanding everything right now. And I always say that's okay. We're not really meant to. That's kind of the whole point of Mercury retrograde. Once we do have Mercury retrograde, late November, early December of this year, that's where we have that opportunity to go back and to get a really thorough understanding of things. Is that fun? No, not usually. Not for most people, but it's necessary, it's worthwhile, and that's what gives us, hopefully by the end of Mercury retrograde, which won't be until December, but by that point, then we have a much more thorough understanding of things, and then we can have that kind of confidence again, if that makes sense. So it's kind of a journey. This is just kind of the start of this whole retrograde process. But yeah, it's not the beginning of Mercury retrograde though. It's very different. Mercury retrograde is a time of going backward. We're not going backward right now. We're going forward very quickly. Almost faster than we normally would. So in a way, it's actually very different from Mercury retrograde. I hope that makes sense. You can always ask me questions in the comments or email me, and I can expand on anything I ever talk about. But yeah, so I just think that's very interesting, though. Again, Mercury is not just at its pre-shadow, it's also in detriment in Sagittarius. So Mercury's in a really funky place right now. Mercury is unusually alone. Mercury is in this cheerful intellectual sign of Sagittarius, which is not the worst place for it to be. But Sagittarius is all about like I said, being kind of grandiose, and everything's larger than life. Everything matters, right? That's what we see with the Jupiter ruled signs where Mercury is in detriment. So both Pisces and Sagittarius say, whatever you're feeling in the moment, that's what's objectively true. That's what matters. You know what I mean? That's true on some level, but what Mercury typically has to do with is being objective with everything, giving everything kind of equal weights or maybe appropriate weight. Sagittarius and Pisces are not necessarily oriented that way to, weighing things in such an objectively kind of detached manner. You know what I mean? So that's where Mercury in Sagittarius, it's not the worst placement to have, but it's not objective, I guess. It's not weighing things in a like objectively kind of proportional manner. It has more heart to it, and that's not a bad thing. And then plus, I think I touched on this, but there's an openness that comes from detriment placements in general. But Mercury in detriment really opens us up to information that we might not usually be open to, or methods of communication we might not typically be open to as well. This is really open-minded energy, for better or for worse. There's a plus and a minus side to everything. But yeah, so really funky stuff there. The main event for this week is actually going to happen on Saturday, November 9th, and this is where we get a first quarter moon. I always say first quarter moons are the most intense parts of the lunar cycle. I would argue even more so than the full moon. This quarter moon is set up in fixed signs, so the sun is at 17 degrees Scorpio, and then early in the day on Saturday, November 9th, when moon reaches 17 degrees Aquarius, actually Eastern time, I think this will happen right after midnight, so kind of in the middle of the night, going between November 8th to November 9th. But once moon reaches 17 Aquarius, that's where it makes that first quarter square to the sun. So this is a particularly interesting first quarter square because we're combining sun in Scorpio with moon in Aquarius. The Scorpio Aquarius square has been called the square of sexuality, the square of revolution. Both Aquarius and Scorpio are very individualistic signs. They're very unique. They're very, how should I phrase this? They're very like counterculture. They're against the status quo. They're against whatever's mainstream, whatever's cool and popular. Aquarius and Scorpio are doing the opposite. You know what I mean? So especially combining that whole dynamic with Mercury and Venus, which are still in Sagittarius, these are very like revolutionary energies. These are very wild, very, like I said, very individualistic, very, very intellectual. But this is the kind of intellectual, like a rebellious kind of intellectualism, if that makes sense. So, really debating things and, being kind of the devil's advocate of everything. And, we're forging our own way, doing our own thing, fiercely fighting for our kind of independence, if that makes sense. With this first quarter moons are a great time to start things because this represents the part of the lunar cycle where we're 1 week into the lunar cycle. So by this point, the moon appears half full in the sky. I know that can be confusing. It's called a quarter moon because it's a quarter of the way through the lunar cycle. We're 1 week into a 4-week cycle, if that makes sense. So that's why it's called that. But this represents the time where the moon has enough light that it's really its own thing now. The moon has enough distance from the sun that it's its own kind of entity, I guess you could say. It's not just a little crescent anymore. It's half full, so we're kind of at a tipping point where whatever has started in this new lunar cycle, which really began a week ago, we now have enough energy and momentum to really start something in a kind of bold and dramatic way. So for more information on that, look to where Aquarius, specifically 17 degrees Aquarius, falls in your chart, because that represents an area of your life that you need to change, that you need to take some kind of action, start something new. You know what I mean? If that's at the top of your chart, then this action and potentially chaos will kind of happen with your career and public image. That's the area where you need to adapt, make some kind of change, start something new, etc. If that's in your area of relationships, you can apply it to whatever part of your chart it falls in. But yeah, that's what's going on. I don't think this quarter moon really aspects anything else other than obviously the sun. Yeah, not really. It does make a trine to Jupiter, which is pretty nice, kind of filtering in more of that air energy. The chart is very intellectual right now, I would say. But yeah, it looks like a wild day, great day to start something. I do think it would be a good day for kind of going out. Like, this does look like party energy to some extent, but don't be surprised if things do get a little chaotic though. So as long as you're up for that, I would say go for it. Go do, whatever your plan is, whatever your outing is for the weekend, go do it. Just know that it might be a little wild, might be a little energetic, but I would say go for it. It looks like a fun day as long as you're into all that. Yeah, and that's pretty much what I have for you for this week. Kind of a short forecast. This is the chart for Sunday, November 10th, the very end of the week. You can see moon kind of reaching Pisces, which is a pretty sweet spot for the moon in my opinion. Moon will approach Saturn, and that channels in a kind of darker, heavier energy, but that will only last for part of the day, Sunday. Sunday looks like a pretty good day as well, but again, much of the day will be affected by moon crossing over Saturn, so it does look like a fun day since moon is approaching that trine to the sun. It's kind of a mixed bag. Definitely a lot of emotion with the moon and sun both in water signs again. So I would say Sunday's a little bit versatile. You could kind of just stay in and like rest and have a down day. If you did need to go out and do something, you could do that too. It's kind of flexible, but it may feel heavier because of the water and Saturn influence. So just maybe be aware of that. Okay, but that's all I have for you for this weekend. I wanted to kind of show I use this website and it's free obviously, but if you just type in 2024 or 2025 Mercury retrograde calendar, you should be able to find the site pretty easily. But it's so handy. It gives you the dates of the pre-shadows, post-shadows, retrogrades, and Mercury stationing direct as well. So I'll link that in the description. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. Next week we have a planet changing signs. We've got a full moon and a planet turning direct. So I'll definitely be happy to talk to you about all that. Okay, thanks so much for watching. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week.